Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I am your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and hear some amazing stories. In today's episode, our story is called Don't Be a Lone Wolf.
And this is not from the movie The Hangover, where you're the one-man wolf pack, right?
Unfortunately, I don't think it'll be that interesting, but it's going to be cool.
Excellent.
Brad, do you remember the $6 Million Man?
Of course I do. Not only did I love watching the TV show about former astronaut Colonel Steve Austin, but I had the Bionic Man action figure.
I did too. I think most of the listeners may not know who the Bionic Man is. You remember his name, Colonel Steve Austin? So the story was in the show in the 70s that he was horribly injured and had to have massive surgery to fix him, thus the $6 Million Man. According to Google, today it would cost $30 million to fix him. And, basically he had his right arm, his legs, his left eye were all replaced with bionic implants that gave him all these superpowers. And it raises the question, I wonder if he had stem cell treatment.
Well, I'm sure that if they're reshooting the Bionic Man in 2020, they probably would consider using some type of enhanced stem cells along with other bionic parts. But I think like a lot of things, they'd soon realize that stem cell treatments are controversial and heavily regulated.
Why do I feel like today's story is going to be about stem cell? Why don't we find out? Do you want to tell us your story?
I think we will. Like all good stories, this one starts with a dark and stormy night. Well, not really. But after hearing this story, it feels like a horror story. It involves friendship, betrayal, greed, regret. The story starts off with an orthopedic surgeon, we'll just call him Dr. Bear, who's a well-known national speaker. He was always looking ways to improve his patient care, and it was an innovator in that sense.
Brad, why Dr. Bear?
Okay, well, this guy, he's a pretty big guy, and as both of you know, I'm not a very big person, but this guy played college football, so big guy, and every single time he saw me, he gave me a giant bear hug.
Fair enough. Dr. Bear it is.
So Dr. Bear became convinced that if he would use stem cell injections, he could successfully find ways to help alleviate pain without surgery, which is a big deal because considering he was a surgeon, but he was still trying to find ways to help his patients. And when he found out this new knowledge, he really was like, okay, I have to go find someone to help launch this clinic. I don't want to do it by myself.
Well, a little context for the audience. Stem cell therapy is really highly regulated, and physicians in most states can't provide it without being part of something called an institutional review board study. So our vocabulary word for the day is IRB, and you will, if you're in stem cell, hopefully you've heard this term, but we'll be using that throughout today.
Yes, you'll hear the term IRB. It will become critical to the story as we progress, but I'll keep going. So as Michael mentioned, he needed to find an organization that he could partner with that knew how to do these correctly. And he reached out to another physician that we'll just call him Dr. Stem Cell and decided to partner with him.
So I'm guessing that Dr. Stem Cell has a strong background in stem cells?
And you would be correct. Dr. Stem Cell had been one of the first pioneers out there as using stem cells as another means for treatment. Also well-known speaker, scientist, researcher. And so, Dr. Bear had known him over the years from being in the speaking circuit with him. He was, Dr. Stem Cell was excited about this opportunity as Dr. Bear was, as figuring out, could we figure out ways to work together? And not only that, because these two gentlemen were so well known, Dr. Stem Cell's key team members, Mr. Greedy and Miss Indisputable.
I'm guessing that was intentional, these fictitious names.
All will be revealed soon. So Dr. Stem Cell's organization had to make some initial changes when they wanted to partner with Dr. Bear because Mr. Greedy and Miss Indisputable originally wanted to have some type of minority ownership in this new clinic with Dr. Baer, but Dr. Baer practiced in a strong corporate practice of medicine state.
Oh, another vocabulary word, corporate practice of medicine. So those who don't know, corporate practice of medicine is a prevalent term in healthcare, and it really comes into play when you have non-physicians being involved in the practice of medicine. And the rule essentially prohibits lay people from participating and controlling medical decisions. And most often it's seen in the form of ownership. So you'll see a state that says, non-physicians can't own a business that is practicing medicine.
Thank you, Michael. So let's fast forward a few months later, after negotiations between the parties so they could figure out how to operate and get together. And eventually, Dr. Baer decided to do a stem cell clinic with using Dr. Stem Cell's IRB. And that's kind of unfortunately the highest point of the story. And Michael, you might even remember this. We got invited to this grand opening party where Dr. Baer was up there, and he was super excited about his new clinic and all the great work he was provide to his patients.
Wait, Brad, is this before or after Dr. Stem Cell was arrested for using self-prescribed painkillers?
Yeah, that would be right after. A few days after Dr. Baer opened his clinic, Dr. Stem Cell was arrested, and all hell broke loose. Dr. Baer, who'd known him for years, was completely blindsided and could not believe it. But Mr. Greedy and Miss Indisputable met with Dr. Baer and assured him that everything would be fine. We can just move forward with this team. And quite honestly, they could do this without Dr. Stem's help.
And so they helped start and run it. Wait, didn't Miss Indisputable temporarily live with Dr. Baer or in his guest house?
Yeah, that's actually a good memory. Yeah, Miss Indisputable was from another state. And so when she moved to the town where Dr. Baer practiced, he just said, "Yeah, why don't you just live with me for a little bit?" And she did. And now going back to her name, she was pretty competent as to what she could or you could not do. So Miss Indisputable was so confident. Unfortunately, she ran off a lot of Dr. Baer's providers that were disagreeing with the way she ran things.
Was Miss Indisputable even a medical provider?
No. She was just someone who was never in doubt as to how it had to be done. So let's fast forward again to several months later. And Dr. Baer's clinic was seeing patients, but it just wasn't very profitable. So he asked Miss Indisputable, what's going on? She's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. Just startup costs and other kind of things." So he didn't worry about it until Dr. Baer received a medical board complaint for an advertisement violation based on a website he had never seen. And what happened was Mr. Greedy had developed a website that said that Dr. Baer Clinic had more experience than any other clinic in the United States.
Wait, didn't the website say that Dr. Baer's clinic was the leading research and treatment facility, providing the most innovative and proven techniques, and even say no other clinic in the United States has a more experienced staff?
Well, of course it did, because they had Miss Indisputable. They had awesome staff. But as you can imagine, Dr. Baer was a little grumpy when he learned that this website existed because he could not believe these ridiculous statements.
Is this the low point of the story?
Yeah, sorry, no. It gets worse. I'll jump a few steps in time and lots of pain. But not only did the medical board investigation open up, but when Dr. Baer asked Mr. Greedy for help to respond to this medical board investigation, because of all the things they said, Mr. Greedy pushed back and said, "Look, all that information that you want, yeah, that's trade secrets, but refuse to provide these trade secrets to inform Dr. Baer about how to respond to this medical board."
Brad, remember, this is a podcast, not a video. The audience couldn't just see your literal air quotes that I just got to witness.
Sorry about that. Yes, air quote trade secrets.
But I can't believe they were so unhelpful with the medical board.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's not even half of it. It turns out Mr. Greedy and Miss Indisputable has been charging lunches and dinners and big entertainment expenses on a credit card in Dr. Baer's name that he had never seen. Further, Mr. Greedy was charging Dr. Baer's clinic for all stem cell supplies, including for out-of-state clinics that Mr. Greedy owned. And it gets worse. And even more troubling than all of that, the entire reason that Dr. Baer had joined them is when we started getting involved, we couldn't figure out which IRB that Dr. Baer under, meaning that one of the main reasons Dr. Baer had joined this organization was based on the fact he could treat patients under Dr. Stem Cell's organizational IRB.
Wow, Brad, that is horrible. Arrest, betrayal, greed. I don't know where we're going to pick up when we get back. I'd love to hear and learn what Dr. Baer should do and what his next steps are. Let's take a break and hear the rest on the other side.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back. Well, Brad, you just told us a horror story. A doctor under investigation by the medical board based on what other people did that he didn't even know about. False charges. I want to hear the rest. So we have a lot to unpack. And let's start working on the first issue, which is providing stem cell services. Give us a little bit of detail on what legal limitations are around providing stem cell therapy.
Yeah, like many medical providers, when you work in new areas of medicine, you truly are acting as an explorer. You're discovering new techniques, and unfortunately, this has extra higher risk. And you fall too far outside the scope of what's considered the standard of care in your community, you can actually jeopardize your medical license.
Well, explain that.
Well, there's two main issues that any physician has to think about, and it's the FDA consideration and the medical boards. So let's just attack the first one, which is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, regulates and approves, among other things, medical devices and medical drugs. But the catch is the FDA does not regulate the practice of medicine. Only your state board can do that. But what happens is the FDA does prohibit you from advertising and it's known as on-label certain drugs for prescription purposes. But they allow physicians to use drugs, and it's known as off-label prescriptions. The easiest one I can always give example is aspirin, right? Aspirin was originally, doctors started realizing it helped with heart conditions, so they started prescribing, hey, take aspirin as an off-label use. The second major issue is the medical boards. Most state medical boards are troubled by the concept of stem cell therapy can actually prove any actual medical benefit to a patient.
So how can a provider protect themselves?
Well, overall, the best way to insulate yourself is, number one, become an expert, educate yourself, and document everything you've done to get yourself there. But number two, you definitely need to make sure that you have an informed consent from your patients, meaning that if you're going to be doing an off-label use of a drug or a device, and you're going to use some type of unproven investigational therapy, you need to let them know about this, explain it to them, let them sign off on that written consent. And finally, if you're using stem cells in particular, most states do require you to have an institutional review board study, an IRB, as Michael mentioned earlier.
Brad, that's a lot of paperwork, a lot of administrative stuff. So why are providers doing these alternative medicine and particularly stem cell therapies? Besides
the fact that many of these providers feel like it is a benefit to the patient, you also have situations where your traditional payers do not pay this. And so as the market changes where your commercial payers aren't paying for this, you have more and more providers who are just going to be saying, hey, if you'd like to do this elective service and you consent to it, you're going to pay me in cash. And these procedures are anywhere from $2,000 to $50,000. So depending on your clinic, there's some serious amount of cash.
Brad, as we have learned through the years in healthcare, that when there's money, a lot of bad actors will come into whatever that opportunity is. And many times they have no real medical background, which of course brings us back to our second vocabulary word for the day, the corporate practice of medicine.
Any person who's looking to develop a stem cell clinic or any other type of alternative medicine practice, a wellness clinic, you have to remember that if you're diagnosing or developing a treatment plan or piercing the skin, in most states, that constitutes the practice of medicine. And so depending on your state law, you're either going to have a physician or an independent or a nurse practitioner with independent authority has to be involved in the control of the medical decision-making. And that control can be stronger, and it varies in different corporate practice of medicine states to the point in some states the physician must have some type of ownership. So let's just look at New York real quick. In New York, the medical clinic, the physician must own it. While in California, the physician must own the majority of it, but other licensed providers could be a part of it. Or they can go to Ohio where anyone can own it, but you still have to have a medical provider helping make medical decisions. So every state's different.
Yeah, and that's the key takeaway for the audience. It does vary so much by state. For timing purposes, we can't get into corporate practice of medicine. We could do an entire podcast on the ins and outs of that. But we work with non-physicians in these strong corporate practice of medicine states, and there is a way to do it. So we just advise that you make it a priority to understand if you're doing business with a non-physician or if you're a non-physician in a provider-based practice, to get legal counsel to make sure you're setting it up correctly. But let's pause on that and get back to the medical board investigation. What happened?
So, as we noted, the medical industry already has a whole bunch of rules that you have to abide by. And one of them is the advertisement rules are no different. And you have two main issues that you have to be aware of, the Federal Trade Commission or the FTC, and then the state medical advertising laws. Okay,
so break those down and differentiate the two.
So quickly, the FTC has a prohibition, and this is for anyone, but medical industry is no different, for the unfair, deceptive acts or practices in commerce. While this is a broad prohibition, compliance with the FTC rules can basically be broken down. You have to be honest, you have to have some transparency, you have to disclose certain things. So that's the kind of easiest way to think about the FTC.
And then tell us about the state medical advertising laws.
So it's important to remember that no matter how you choose to advertise in any of these social medias, like in this particular case, we had a website issue, is that you have to comply with the state laws. And with most states, almost every one of them has the same three words. You cannot be false, deceptive, or misleading. So what does that mean? Well, that means you can't create unjustified expectations. You can't just have a product out saying, if you take this, it will cure a disease, unless you obviously can prove it. Or you can't guarantee results, or you can't have false or deceptive or misleading testimonials. And so going back to our current example, when you say something like you're the leading research and treatment facility in the United States, and you have proven techniques and therapies, unless you can actually prove it, you can't say it.
So if, for example, they had a registered patentable medical procedure, would that make a difference?
Of course, yeah. I mean, assuming they did, or even they were listed as top doctor as recognized by, USA Today or New York Times or whatever the local magazine or trade association award, you can always use that in your marketing. You just can't say you're the best at something just because your mom said so.
So in this case, what happened to Dr. Baer?
It was a long run for him. Unfortunately, we had to go in front of the actual medical board, but we did eventually get the complaint dismissed. So that was good. He did terminate his relationship with Mr. Greedy and fired Miss Indisputable, which I guess meant she had to move out of his house. And then, unfortunately, he was in years of litigation with these parties. To really start talking about this horror story, it gets a lot worse, is that Mr. Greedy and Miss Indisputable may have framed Dr. Stem Cell to take over the other clinic. To be clear, we do not represent Dr. Stem Cell, but I have had many conversations with his attorneys over the year, and she was the one giving me a lot of the background as to Mr. Greedy and Miss Indisputable may have been some bad actors.
We've been practicing a long time, and every time I hear it, it's truly stunning. Let's put a bow on it. What are some takeaways that you can give the audience?
Yeah, look, the medical industry, it's complicated as it is, and then unfortunately they have complicated laws on top of it. And so in this particular case, even a seasoned medical provider will not be able to spot every single rule and regulation. So the most important thing I can tell you is just don't go at it as a lone wolf. Make sure you surround yourself with someone who understands these rules and regulations. And secondly, medical providers, you have to answer to your medical boards. And remember that. And if you're a non-physician and you want to partner with them and you're new to this industry, make sure that you understand that you're trying to protect providers' license throughout this process. And so surround yourself with people who understand these rules. If you are partnering with a non-physician who's new to this industry, make sure you check or double check or have someone, make sure that they understand what these rules are or they have surrounded themselves with someone does, because ultimately you as the medical provider, it's on you, and you have to comply with these rules and you have to understand it.
Brad, I'm going to circle back. I think I have some bad news for both of us. I'm starting to think the $6 million man did not, in fact, have stem cell therapy. But even worse, I think it might not be a real person.
Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.